Good evening, friends, and welcome to Dark Historian tonight. I've brought you a quiet, calming tale, a gentle bedtime, sleep story for wakeful minds and wandering hearts. This video is part of the Boring History for Sleep Stories series, made to help you unwind and fall asleep fast. In this episode, I'll share soothing sleep stories that invite your thoughts to slow down and your body to let go. If your mind is still busy, or if peace feels far away, you've found the right place. So gently close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let these sleep-inducing chronicles of history carry you into rest. Your silent night begins now. With Dark Historian, Story 1, Perfume, Papyrus, and the Shadow of the Tides, the slow drowning of Cleopatra ink, oil, and early currents. Good evening, dear dreamer. Tonight, rest your bones upon soft linens and listen to the gentle rhythm of history's tides. We are traveling far from dusty saloons and olive groves now, floating down the slow current of the Nile. Beneath a moon shimmering like a pale eye in the black sky. Tonight, you drift alongside a queen, a woman often imagined as all glittering jewels and sharp glances. But here, we do not chase legend's loud footsteps. We listen for the softest rustlings behind the silken curtains. We follow Cleopatra not as the dramatic temptress, but as a quiet keeper of ink, papyrus, oil, and slow breath, each choice as delicate as the sigh of the tide against marble steps. Before the kingdom trembled under Roman boots, before the asp and the final sigh, Cleopatra the Seventh lived days filled not with grand banquets, alone but with gentle routines shaped by the demands of empire and the whispers of the river. Imagine the morning air, still cool before the Egyptian sun begins its merciless ascent. A low breeze drifts in from the harbor, carrying a briny scent mixed with lotus blossoms and fermenting fish from the market. At dawn, Cleopatra would rise, her linen sheets sticking slightly to skin already kissed by early warmth. In her private chamber, a slave girl gently fans her while another sprinkles perfumed water onto her hands. This perfume kiffi is not just a luxury but a ritual. It contains honey, wine, raisins, myrrh, and frankincense, boiled down into a sleepy sweetness meant to soothe both spirit and flesh. While the city beyond stirs slowly, Cleopatra remains still, her mind weaving through scrolls left unfinished the night before. She does not leap from her bed with a warrior's haste. She lets the morning slip over her body like silk. Papyrus scrolls, stacked and slightly frayed, lie waiting in a corner. Cleopatra was no passive monarch. She learned at her father's side, studied in the grand library, debated philosophers, late into moonlit nights. Each morning, she reviewed daily edicts, petitions from small villagers, a priver, letters from Roman officials who could alter the shape of the Nile's winding story with a single careless demand. A scribe enters the room, softly carrying a reed brush and ink made from soot and gum. Cleopatra sits upright now, wrapping a thin white robe around her shoulders. The scribe kneels, opening a new scroll. They speak in whispers. The room feels like a floating temple of breath and ink. She listens carefully to grain reports from the Delta, murmuring approval or slight adjustments. A village complains of a broken irrigation canal. She orders funds to repair it before the barley fails. A dispute over temple taxes appears. She balances patience and authority with every phrase. Outside, the first notes of flutes drift up from the palace garden. Musicians begin their practice early, the same few scales repeating gently in the air. The slow pattern of these sounds acts like a heartbeat in the background of Cleopatra's thoughts. Near the window, jars of scented oil line a low shelf. Rose, lotus, frankincense, each sealed with wax and clay stoppers. When the scribe departs, Cleopatra stands and chooses a small jar. She rubs a few drops into her wrists and behind her ears, the scent rising like a delicate veil around her. There is no hurry in these motions. Each gesture is deliberate, each pause a quiet ripple on the surface of her mourning. She moves next to her mirror, polished bronze rather than glass. In its shimmering, slightly warped surface, she does not see the conqueror or the seductress, but the daughter, the priestess, the woman who waits each day for her empire's many small tides to return safely. Servants bring bowls of honey cakes, figs, and a diluted wine lightly scented with herbs. She eats slowly, careful not to soil the delicate linen wrapping her hair. Between bites, she looks out beyond the columns of her private balcony to the Nile's moving sheet of blue and green. The river has been her lifelong companion. It shapes Egypt's belly, brings new silt to old fields, hides crocodiles beneath its silky surface, and carries secrets in every eddy. Cleopatra understands its moods as one understands a restless lover, sometimes generous and deep, sometimes withholding and cruel. After the meal, she moves to a low writing table. Here, she practices Greek and Egyptian scripts, brushing characters onto small scraps of papyrus. She studies them, crosses them out, starts again. Though she is a ruler, she knows words can command where swords fail. When the sun rises higher, the palace begins to fill with soft noise. Sandals scuffing, bronze vessels clinking, the slow drape of linen robes. Advisors gather in the audience hall, preparing for an endless flow of dignitaries and small city officials bringing petitions and tributes. But Cleopatra lingers a little longer in her private space, slipping between scrolls and silences, between perfumed oils and old ghostly echoes of dynasties past. Nearby, small jars of coal and ground malachite pigments wait to be mixed. She applies them herself, sometimes slowly, gently, like a potter smoothing a new vessel. Each stroke at her eyelid is an invocation, a protection, a reminder that her gaze is her sharpest blade. Later in the morning, she moves through a quiet corridor lined with papyrus rolls and clay tablets. She pauses to examine a large, detailed map of the Mediterranean basin drawn in faint ochre and blue-black lines. She traces her finger along the coastline, touching Cyprus, then moving up to the mountains of Cilicia, over to the rocky shores of the Adriatic. A flicker of worry crosses her face as she thinks of Roman galleys, of soldiers whose metal feet echo like hammers against marble. But she breathes deeply, pressing her palm to her chest to center herself. She continues walking, her bare feet whispering along the cool stone. She passes a gardener trimming lotus stems in a shallow marble pool. Water beads on the gardeners, arms falling like slow rain into the rippling pond. Cleopatra stops and watches, mesmerized. The gentle snip of the shears, the way the blossoms nod forward, as if in quiet agreement, each detail etches itself into her memory. When the gardener bows deeply and offers her a freshly cut lotus, she accepts it with a soft word of thanks. The flower's pale fragrance drifts around her face as she continues down the hall, back in her chamber. She places the lotus beside a small bronze figurine of Isis, mother goddess, protector of the pharaohs. She touches the goddess's face with 2 fingers, a silent invocation that no priest needs to witness. After midday, Cleopatra finally moves into the audience chamber. Light streams in high windows, catching on hanging drapes dyed deep pomegranate. Red. Marble floors stretch ahead like a still sea, each footstep sending faint echoes into the vaulted ceiling. Delegates and scribes line up, each holding scrolls, offerings, or simple requests. The room smells of parchment, sweat, and the faint resinous scent from a nearby incense brazier. One man brings a basket of woven date fronds, lined with pale pomegranates. Another holds a tiny bronze sculpture meant to secure an audience on behalf of his fishing village. A third brings a jar of honey so thick it gleams like amber in the filtered light. Cleopatra listens patiently, her gaze steady but not harsh. Each petition is weighed in her mind like a stone on a balanced scale. Her answers come slow and measured, wrapped in careful courtesy and edged, when needed, with the quiet certainty of a ruler who knows the Nile's temper. Throughout it all, her fingers rest on a small tablet placed beside her chair. She occasionally lifts the stylus notes down, a thought, a number, a reminder, as the sun angles downward and shadows lengthen across the floor. The final visitor bows low and withdraws. The room empties, leaving a hush like an abandoned temple. Servants approach to remove the offerings, carrying baskets carefully to storerooms or temple treasuries. Cleopatra stands, stretching slowly, her spine arching like a cat's in the fading warmth. She moves toward a side balcony where the last light stains the river in layers of gold and pale lavender. The water shivers under the evening breeze, the current carrying whispers from apriva fields and distant delta marshes. Here she stands, alone, lotus blossom in hand, breathing in the river's damp perfume, feeling the air cool against her cheeks. In this long, sleepy moment, Cleopatra is not the jewel of the Nile, not the threat to Rome, not the love-struck queen. She is simply a daughter of the river, standing barefoot on a marble ledge, her heart beating in slow synchrony with the patient pulse of the Nile. She closes her eyes and feels the gentle tug of the water in her veins. Each small sound, a fish breaking the surface, a distant or dipping rhythmically, folds her further into a soft trance. When she finally turns back inside, the last light has slipped below the horizon. Lamps flicker to life along the halls, each flame a tiny guardian against the creeping dark. Tides in the moonlight asterisk, good evening again, gentle dreamer. Tonight, the river widens and deepens beneath the moon's pale gaze. Rest easy under your blanket, feel your pulse soften like a reed swaying in the breeze, and come float in Cleopatra's moonlit corridors, where every sigh is a ripple and every echo holds an empire's breath. When we last left her, Cleopatra drifted between ink and incense, drifting toward sleep. But a queen's mind rarely rests. Even in the late hours, thoughts run like secret currents through her skull. The fate of harvests, the moods of Roman envoys, the whispers of palace corridors. Tonight she wakes before dawn, the softest brush of a breeze slipping across her cheek. She opens her eyes slowly. A small oil lamp flickers beside her, throwing gentle shadows across the marble floor. Somewhere beyond her window, the Nile shivers under starlight. She does not rise abruptly. Instead, she lies still, feeling each breath roll across her ribs like a small wave. She counts her heartbeats, 1, 2, 3, grounding herself before the day's tide carries her outward again. After some time, she lifts herself from the couch and steps into a shallow basin set into the floor. The water is cold, drawn from deep cisterns, cooled by moonlit stone. She lowers her shoulders into it, her skin tightening as if the entire river passes through her veins. Attendants move quietly around her, sprinkling crushed lotus petals and a few drops of cedar oil into the basin. They do not speak, only the water's gentle lapping against marble and the faint chirp of early crickets outside break the silence. Emerging, Cleopatra's skin glistens, her hair damp and coiled like seaweed at the nape of her neck. A linen cloth is draped over her shoulders, and she steps toward a low stool where an attendant rubs her feet with olive oil, mixed with ground sea salt. This is not luxury in the way stories tell it. It is preparation, a queen's armor made not of bronze or iron, but of skin rituals and slow breaths. Each gesture is a barrier against the coming day, a quiet vow to remain unshaken beneath Rome's looming shadow. When she sits before her bronze mirror, she touches her own face with careful fingers. Around her eyes, faint creases mark sleepless seasons. She studies them not with vanity, but with a quiet, almost scientific curiosity. She applies kohl slowly, each line a spell against misfortune and betrayal. The black extends beyond her eyes like small, protective wings. She murmurs softly, phrases learned at temple thresholds, words meant to guard rather than conquer. On a small table nearby, her breakfast waits: dates, soft cheese, barley bread, brushed with honey, and a cup of herbal infusion steeped with mint and wormwood. She eats in slow, patient bites, pausing to glance at a scroll propped before her, a letter from a northern village requesting seeds after a locust swarm. She notes each sentence carefully, as though each word might bloom or wither at her touch after her meal. She moves toward a sun-dappled courtyard where papyrus plants cluster around a shallow pool. Here, scribes gather each morning, preparing documents and recording small tributes sent from distant provinces. Cleopatra walks among them quietly. The rustle of papyrus sheets resembles the sound of reeds in the wind, a music known only to those who live by rivers. She pauses to watch a young scribe practicing hieroglyphs on a fragment of broken pottery. His brush hesitates, lines wavering, like reeds caught in a sudden gust. Cleopatra leans over, gently placing her hand over his to guide the motion. "Steady," she whispers. "The word breathes with you." The boy's eyes widen, his breath shallow. Under her soft guidance, his brush steadies, the glyphs take shape. She smiles faintly, then straightens and drifts onward. Next, she enters a cool hallway lined with small statues, gods and guardians carved from black basalt and white limestone. She touches each lightly, as if greeting old friends. Her fingers pause on a small figure of Hathor, goddess of love and joy. For a long moment, Cleopatra stands there, eyes closed, lips moving in an inaudible prayer. Beyond the statues lies a small room set aside for music and private council. Musicians wait, with lyres and double flutes. Advisors sit in a crescent, each carrying scrolls or ledgers. A young woman stands in the corner, holding a shallow bowl of rosewater to refresh the air. Cleopatra raises her hand, and the music begins, gentle, circling notes drifting like morning fog. She listens, her eyes resting on the floor mosaics, depicting papyrus boats and crocodiles. Slipping between reeds, an advisor steps forward to discuss grain transport delays on the western canals. Another presents news from Rome. The Senate squabbles over eastern provinces, and Marcus Antonius sends cryptic lines about loyalty and winter campaigns. Her answers arrive not as thunderclaps, but as quiet ripples. She nods, adjusts numbers, suggests. alternate routes, dictates a gentle but firm letter to be sent across the sea. When each advisor bows and withdraws, Cleopatra remains still, her hands folded over her lap. The music lingers a moment longer, then fades into silence. Only the slow drip of a water clock echoes against the walls. She rises and crosses to a low window. Outside, fishermen guide boats along the riverbank, nets glimmering like spider webs under the rising sun. She watches them carefully, thinking of how every net mended, every boat corked, shapes the empire's veins as surely as any law. Returning to her chamber, she kneels before a small shrine carved into the wall. There rests a polished alabaster jar containing sacred oils, offerings to Isis and Osiris. Cleopatra lights a small cone of incense, the smoke rising in tight spirals, carrying her whispered wishes to the ceiling's shadows. She asks not for power or conquest, but for calm waters, strong harvests, and a quiet heart in the hours before sleep. As midday approaches, she joins a small gathering in an enclosed garden courtyard. Vines twist up marble columns, and bright flowers spill from clay pots. Here, she shares a simple meal with her most trusted companions: soft figs, fresh cucumber slices, lentils seasoned with coriander, and a thin barley beer. They talk softly of poetry, astronomy, village customs. One friend describes a recent festival where children painted shells and sang to the moon. Another speaks of a young poet who claims he can hear stars singing if he sits beneath the temple's roof at night. Cleopatra listens, each story folding into her like layers of a soft quilt. She asks gentle questions, savoring each small detail as though tasting a rare spice. After the meal, she wanders alone into a secluded portico shaded by woven reed mats. There she rests, head against a carved pillar, eyes half-dashed closed, dot in her mind's drift. She remembers childhood lessons, standing beside her father as he read scrolls aloud, practicing speeches in front of her brothers, learning how to read the river's moods from the old. Fishermen at the palace steps. The Nile has always been her mirror, sometimes reflecting her grace, sometimes her grief. As she drifts in half-sleep, the current of memory carries her deeper. She sees her mother's gentle hands pressing oil into her hair, the scent of crushed lotus petals rising in warm waves. She hears her own voice echoing in temple halls, chanting prayers meant to knit the living and the dead into one soft breath. When she wakes, the afternoon sun angles sharply across the portico. She stands, shakes the sleep from her limbs, and returns to her daily rounds. She checks on storehouses where grain is stacked in thick-walled rooms, each jar marked with symbols to track its origin and weight. She touches the amphorae gently, as though listening to their ancient heartbeat. Further along, she visits the weaving rooms. Women sit cross-legged, looms tilted before them, fingers flicking threads into patient rhythms. She watches as linen cloth slowly emerges, pale as morning mist, strong as river reeds. One weaver looks up, her forehead beaded with sweat, and hesitates. Cleopatra bends down, praises the evenness of her thread, then adjusts a small error with a flick of her fingers. The weaver exhales in relief, her shoulders softening like cloth draped from a hook. Later, Cleopatra moves to the docks, where crates of pomegranates, ivory, and jars of salted fish await transport. She steps carefully along narrow planks, waves softly to sailors, tying ropes and checking sails. A sailor offers her a small carved figurine, a fish shaped from driftwood, its belly smoothed by the river's endless caress. she accepts it, turning it over in her palm, feeling the faint pulse of distant tides within its grain. By the time the sun nears the horizon, she returns to her chamber. There, she finds a fresh linen robe waiting. The lotus blossom she carried earlier, now floating in a bowl of water beside her bed. She eats a light supper, a pomegranate cut open, a few olives, a slice of cheese, and a fig so ripe it bursts. Under her fingers, each taste is a gentle hymn to the day's quiet labors, as the sky shifts to indigo and stars shiver into view. She lies down on her low couch, draping the linen lightly over her. The small driftwood fish rests beside her head. A silent guardian, an attendant recites verses from a scroll, a story of a heron gliding across moonlit reeds, of fishermen who sang to the river to calm its jealous storms, of star maps drawn on temple ceilings with slow, reverent hands. Cleopatra listens, her eyelids lowering, her breathing evening into a soft tide. In her dreams tonight, she walks barefoot along the Nile's edge, each step leaving a print that fills instantly with shimmering fish. She carries a small oil lamp, its flame a fragile star in her palm. The last petals on the river, asterisk, good evening once more, gentle listener. Tonight, we return to the hush of oil lamps and moonlit water, to the final ripples of a queen's life as they slip softly into legend. Rest your head, breathe deeply, feel. Your heart beats slow, like a barge drifting downstream. When we left Cleopatra, she floated between dreams and soft lamplight, listening to poetry and tracing her thoughts across the dark surface of the Nile. Yet, as time curled forward, the outside world pressed ever closer, like distant thunder crawling over the horizon. The Romans were not merely rumors in her letters anymore. Their galleys gleamed under the Egyptian sun. Their soldiers wrapped the edges of her kingdom like cold iron. But here, in her private chambers, Cleopatra continued her gentle rituals, oil, scrolls, and long pauses. In these final months, she awoke each day before dawn, before the birds called to each other along the riverbanks. The first sound was always the hush of the Nile, lapping gently at its shores. She would rise quietly, as if trying not to disturb the ancient ghosts that walked her halls at night. She stepped into her basin, feeling the cold water steal her breath just for a moment, and let the shock settle into her bones like a silent prayer. Servants brought oil infused with lotus, cedar, and hints of sweet marjoram. She rubbed it into her arms and shoulders slowly, as though weaving invisible armor around her skin. Some mornings she lingered at the window, watching fishermen's lanterns wink in the darkness. She imagined their quiet voices drifting across the water, each man hoping for a simple catch, each net cast as a humble offering to the river's unseen gods. In her mind, she reviewed diplomatic letters, the tremor in a Roman general's promise, the measured courtesy in an envoy's flattery. She knew every word carried a weight heavier than gold. When she sat to break her fast pomegranate seeds, barley bread, and sips of diluted honey wine, she still read scrolls with unwavering attention. She marked the scroll edges with tiny dots, a private system for revisiting key phrases. After breakfast, she retreated into her library. Here sunlight filtered through thin linen curtains, turning the air into a golden fog. Rows of papyrus rolls, stacked like slender reeds, lined the walls. Some held hymns to Isis and Osiris. Others carried mundane records, harvest tallies, temple expenses, lists of fishermen's debts. Cleopatra ran her fingers across the scroll edges, pausing to inhale. the faint, dusty scent, a fragrance of time itself. Each scroll felt like a quiet river current. You could never touch the same words in the same way twice. On certain days, she summoned a trusted astrologer. They sat across a low table in the library, a small oil lamp flickering between them. He drew star charts with a reed pen dipped in indigo ink, whispering of planetary alignments, ominous crossings, and hidden blessings. Cleopatra listened patiently, nodding, occasionally closing her eyes as though tasting the words on her tongue. Sometimes she traced small constellations onto her palm with her fingertip, repeating their shapes until they felt like part of her own body. Stars and tides, empires and ink, all wound together in her slow inner cosmos. By midday, she walked slowly through the palace gardens. The gardeners always bowed deeply, but she only nodded softly, encouraging them to return to their careful pruning and watering. The gardens smelled of myrtle, acacia blossoms, and sun-warmed stone. Bees drifted lazily from one bloom to the next, unhurried and oblivious to empire's tremors. Cleopatra stopped often to watch them, charmed by their serene devotion to each moment. At a quiet pond shaded by date palms, she sat for long intervals, listening to the water's gentle ripple against lotus stems. Sometimes she dipped her toes into the coolness, feeling as though she might dissolve into the pond itself. As the sun began its slow slide toward the horizon, advisors trickled in, carrying reports and petitions. Each voice entered her awareness, like a small pebble dropped into a still pool, rippling outwards. One advisor spoke of merchants refusing tribute in protest of new Roman taxes. Another mentioned laborers abandoning fields in the Fayum, drifting north to escape requisitioned grain quotas. Cleopatra responded with a soft firmness, adjusting tax rates in one region, promising new irrigation ditches in another, approving grain shipments for temples. She wrote each decree with her own hand, pressing the stylus deliberately as though sealing each decision inside her body. After these meetings, she returned to her private chamber, a sanctum of low couches, red baskets, and folded linens. The fading sunlight painted delicate stripes across the floor. Here, she often dictated personal letters, soft appeals to old allies, quiet reassurances to distant priests, small gestures of loyalty to household staff. Her words felt less like commands and more like gentle currents, coaxing a drifting barge back to shore. She would rest briefly then, drifting into a fragile sleep haunted by the scent of lamp oil and the distant creak of shipmasts in the harbor. In her dreams, she sometimes found herself standing on a narrow sandbank in the middle of the Nile. On one side, the water shimmered gold. On the other, it churned dark and opaque. She bent to scoop water into her palms, but it always slipped away, running through her fingers as though it had never existed. She woke slowly, fingers curled against her chest as if still holding something precious. At dusk, she joined a few loyal companions for a modest meal, grilled fish with coriander, lentil stew, small figs. A harpist played in the corner, each string vibrating like a thin pulse in the air. They spoke in low tones of the stars returning to the night, of small shrines in Thebes, where travelers left ivory combs and woven bracelets as offerings. Cleopatra would sometimes stop mid-bite, gazing toward the far wall where a thin crack split the paint. To others, it might seem like distraction, but in truth, she listened for the tremor in the air, the small sigh of the empire's foundations shifting beneath her dot. After supper, she often retreated to a small terrace overlooking the river. The moon, round and luminous, floated above, the water turning the waves into sheets of silver. She stood there for long stretches, the breeze twisting her thin linen robe around her ankles. On these nights, she recited poetry aloud, fragments from Sappho, lines from old Egyptian hymns. Her voice drifted down to the reeds, carried away to fishermen hidden among the shadows. Some nights, she envisioned all her choices as pebbles cast into the Nile, each creating ripples that met, collided, and faded into the wide, indifferent. Dark, she thought of her ancestors, buried beneath heavy stone and soft sands. She wondered whether they too had listened to the river's hush, had felt the weight of countless eyes watching every movement, every sigh. When the moon rose higher, she returned inside, where an attendant prepared her bed with fresh linens, and laid a small vial of oil beside her pillow, a blend of blue lotus and sandalwood meant to calm the mind before sleep. She pressed the vial to her lips, inhaling the faint sweetness, and lay back. In these final evenings, her dreams shifted. She no longer saw triumphant processions or golden diadems. Instead, she wandered empty courtyards, tracing invisible lines across cracked tiles, listening to voices that seemed to call from beneath the stones. In one dream, she followed a narrow path lined with oil lamps, each flame wavering as she passed. At the end of the path stood a figure in a simple linen robe, face obscured, holding a single papyrus scroll pressed to its chest. She reached for it, but the figure stepped backward, the scroll unrolling into the wind, words scattering like startled birds into the night sky. She woke then, each time, her hand extended, fingers closing round nothing but moonlight. As the days continued, Rome's shadow thickened. Messengers arrived daily, each carrying demands that pressed tighter around her. Whispers filled the palace halls, rumors of Antony's faltering forces, Roman envoys plotting among priests, deserting soldiers moving like ghosts through the night. Yet within her private walls, she maintained her slow pace. The perfume rituals continued. The scrolls were read and marked. The ink was stirred and set with the same deliberate calm in her last mornings. She visited the temple at Philae in her mind, even if not in body. She imagined stepping across the cool stones, pausing beneath the columns painted with stars and birds. She heard phantom priests chanting, the low drums echoing her own heartbeat. She saw Isis waiting in the sanctuary, a motherly shape of shadow and lamplight. She imagined kneeling before the goddess, offering up her last thin coil of breath. As the final evening neared, Cleopatra sat long by her window, watching a pale breeze tug at the river's surface. A single barge passed, its small lantern bobbing like a star adrift. She traced her fingers along the sill, feeling each faint groove left by decades of wind and sun. Her final meal was modest, a cluster of grapes, a fig cut into quarters, a few sips of wine touched with herbs. Each taste lingered on her tongue like a prayer. Before retiring, she opened a small coffer. Inside, she touched the ASP's woven basket. No shouts, no rush of feet, only the small, coiled hush of finality. She did not hurry. She sat upon her low couch, smoothed her linen robe, dabbed perfume along her wrists and behind her ears. Each movement, slow, ceremonial, as if preparing for an unseen guest. She touched her small driftwood fish one last time, pressed it gently to her lips. She lay back, eyes on the ceiling beams, and exhaled a final, soft breath into the night's wide hush. Story 2. The tea leaves whispering sleep and survival in a Magiera tea house. the steam before sunrise ood evening. Gentle wanderer, nestle into your blanket. Let the hush of twilight wrap around your shoulders like an old, beloved shawl. Tonight, we drift eastward beyond Cleopatra's moonlit waters, across shifting waves and fog-choked harbors, to the small wooden tea houses of Majira, Japan. Here, in the last years of the 19th century, as Japan teetered between quietude and the echoing march of industrial modernity, tea remained an anchor, an old friend. A quiet ritual that survived railway whistles and the sharp scent of imported coal. Our story tonight does not concern emperors or warlords, but rather a small woman named Kiku, whose life revolved around steam, slender ceramic cups, and the whisper of tea leaves tumbling into hot water. When the stars still blink in the navy sky, Kiku's day begins. She rises in the cool hour before the roosters call, her futon creasing beneath her knees as she bows her head in a silent morning greeting to her ancestors. Her thin cotton robe, softened by many washes, smells faintly of roasted barley and smoke from last night's hearth before any guests arrive. Before the first coal is stoked, Kiku moves to her tiny garden behind the tea house. There, small stepping stones gleam with dew, moss clings stubbornly to the edges, and slender bamboo stalks tremble as if shivering at the memory of an old ghost passing by. She squats near the stone basin, dipping her fingers into the chilled water. She scoops it up to her face in slow movements, as if the water might slip away if she rushed. The water carries the scent of fallen plum blossoms and the earthy whisper of wet soil. Kik, you remain still for a while, breathing deeply, her mind as quiet as the distant mountains under first light. She listens to the echo of a lone crow calling from a tiled rooftop, and the gentle clack of a neighbor's bamboo water fountain tipping over. When she stands, her knees creak softly, and she laughs to herself in a thin, breathy whisper. Age creeps through her bones like a shy cat, careful and persistent. She moves inside, passing a faded Norran curtain that still holds the faint aroma of incense and steam. The tea house is no grand hall. Its floors are worn smooth by sandals and bare feet, the tatami mats frayed at the corners. Along one wall, a row of ceramic tea jars stands guard like silent monks, each marked with delicate calligraphy. Gyakudo, Sencha, Bancha, and Marcha. Kiku kneels by the hearth, pulling aside the small iron kettle that had cooled overnight. She adds charcoal carefully, stacking each piece as if arranging a bouquet. The first spark glows, trembling like a newborn firefly, and she coaxes it patiently until the small flame begins its gentle dance. As the water begins to sigh and roll, she opens a wooden box containing her most precious possession, a small cloth pouch of tea leaves gifted to her by an old friend from Uji. The leaves, curled and dark, shimmer faintly under the lantern light, as though they remember the gentle breeze of sunlit fields. She measures them by touch, letting them slip through her fingers like a slow waterfall. When she places them in the teapot, she closes her eyes and inhales, holding the scent in her lungs like a prayer. Outside, the first guest arrives, an old carpenter named Taro, whose back curves like an old willow in the wind. He always comes early, before his tools echo through the neighborhood. He bows deeply at the threshold, pausing to tap his sandals on the wooden step. Kiku greets him with a bow so deep it seems to touch the tatami. She offers him a seat by the small window, where the morning light creeps shyly along the floor. The tea is poured slowly, the thin stream glimmering as though it carries moonlight. Each movement of Kiku's hand is deliberate. The tilt of the pot, the pause, the soft clink of ceramic against ceramic. Taro accepts the tea in silence, his weathered hands trembling slightly. He gazes into the cup as if reading a message only he can understand. Each sip is a soft retreat into memory. The taste of spring rain, the scent of damp earth after the first thaw, the warmth of a long-forgotten embrace. When he finishes, Taro bows again, murmuring words of gratitude, so quiet they vanish into the steam. Kiku bows in return, her forehead nearly touching the mat. As he leaves, Kiku remains kneeling, her hands folded lightly on her lap. In these early hours, she does not think of profits or rival tea houses. She thinks of steam as it rises and dissolves, of how each breath might carry away a little sorrow if you watch closely enough. Soon after, another guest arrives, a young woman named Aya, her hair tied in a loose bun, eyes red from sleepless nights, tending to her sick child. Aya's footsteps are hesitant, her gaze lowered, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Kiku invites her to sit close to the hearth. She chooses a different tea this time, a softer bancha, with a comforting roasted scent. As she prepares it, she hums a low, tuneless melody, a sound as comforting as an old lullaby. Aya's eyes flutter shut as the tea is set before her. Her shoulders sag, as though the steam itself weighs gently upon them, urging them to rest. She does not speak. She merely lifts the cup, inhales deeply, and lets the warmth spill across her tongue and down into the hidden caverns of her exhaustion. When Aya finally opens her eyes, they glisten with unshed tears. She bows deeply, lips trembling. Kiku does not ask questions. Instead, she reaches forward and gently presses her fingertips to Aya's knuckles. A silent blessing passed like a soft breeze. Aya leaves lighter, her steps no longer echoing with the same heavy cadence. In these moments, Kiku feels a quiet pride ripple through her chest. Not the pride of conquest or coin, but the subtle warmth of knowing that each cup poured might mend a frayed corner of the world, however small. Throughout the morning, guests arrive and depart like drifting clouds. A scholar with ink-stained sleeves who recites lines of bashu beneath his breath. A young apprentice bringing a lotus blossom as payment. A traveling merchant who simply sits, his face hidden behind the rising swirl of steam. Each encounter is a soft note in a long, drifting melody, a song woven not from grand crescendos, but from hushed pauses and small sips. Between guests, Kiku tends the hearth. She wipes stray droplets from the teapot, checks the kettle's rolling boil, adjusts the small wooden scoops. The room is filled with the constant, gentle percussion of water and wood, the quiet rustle of sleeves, the sigh of breath leaving tired lungs dot by late morning. The sun reaches high enough to paint bright rectangles across the tatami mats. The bamboo blinds tremble gently as a breeze passes through, carrying the scent of distant sea salt and warm earth. Kiku stands for a moment, her hand resting on the doorway frame. She feels the warmth of the sun soak into her palm, and for a few breaths, she is not a tea server, not a widow, not an aging woman whose knees ache in the damp. She is simply a point of warmth, an echo of light, a human vessel waiting to be filled and emptied like her favorite clay cup. In these small moments, the world outside, the new rail lines, the telegraph wires humming with news of distant battles, and treaties fades into a mist too far to touch. The only reality that matters is the thin thread of steam rising from her kettle, curling into the rafters like an old spirit returning home, As she prepares for the midday lull, Kiku kneels. Once more at the hearth, her hands moving automatically, as if guided by the memory of 1,000 mornings before. Her breath settles into the same soft rhythm as the rolling boil, and the room becomes a cocoon of fragrant warmth and pale light. And here, dear dreamer, as you rest under your blanket, you might hear the faint clink of ceramic, the quiet hum of water, the whisper of bamboo leaves outside. Let your breath move as slowly as the steam. Let your thoughts dissolve into the pale swirl above the teacup. We have only begun our journey into Kiku's world, her silent offerings to strangers and spirits alike. Rest here for now, and when you're ready, we will continue deeper into the tea house's gentle rhythms. Shadows behind the screen, asterisk, good evening, again, gentle dreamer. You are still here, under your blanket, listening to the hush of another time. The kettle's slow song calls you back into Kiku's world, where each sigh of steam carries 1,000 secrets, and each cup of tea is a small raft floating across the heart's dark waters. We left Kiku in her tea house as the morning sun slipped higher, weaving pale gold across the tatami. Now, let us slip with her into the long, secretive afternoons, where shadows gather behind the paper screens and the town's heartbeat softens to a lazy thrum. After the morning rush, Kiku moves into the back kitchen. The kettle remains warm. On the hearth, humming softly like an old lullaby, she opens a low wooden cupboard and retrieves a small box wrapped in faded silk. Inside are her personal tea leaves, a mix she prepares only for herself, blending fragile gyokuro with tiny pinches of dried yuzu, peel and crushed shiso leaf. She measures the blend with the care of a priest tending sacred incense. The aroma rises, grassy, bright, and faintly citrus, as though summer itself decided to whisper into her nose. Kiku pours the water, careful not to let it boil too fiercely. She lets it sit and swirl, each tiny leaf unfolding like a waking cat stretching. After sleep, she listens for the moment when the steam changes pitch, a soft transition known only to those who spend years at the hearth's side. She pours a single cup and carries it to the tiny garden. The bamboo fence leans gently, moss growing along the lower edges. She lowers herself onto a smooth stone, her knees complaining in gentle cracks, but she only smiles. Here she sips alone. The tea's warmth slides down her throat, untying the small knots that worry themselves together during each day. The silent questions in a guest's eyes, the tremble in an old carpenter's hands, the forgotten errands she meant to finish weeks ago. Above her, a cicada starts its long, rhythmic call. The sound vibrates through the bamboo leaves and into Kiku's bones. It reminds her of her childhood, running barefoot along the muddy paths of her mother's village, hair unpinned, small hands sticky with plum juice. She closes her eyes and drifts in memory, the smell of sun-warmed tatami, the gentle murmur of neighbors' voices, the long days when her greatest worry was whether the rain would spoil the laundry. As the tea disappears, she breathes out a slow sigh, as though releasing a tightly kept secret. She rests the empty cup beside her on the stone and watches a small spider lower itself on a single shimmering thread. It dances lightly in the breeze, as if greeting her. Returning inside, she checks the supply jars, counting them not with a merchant's hunger for profit, but with the patient gaze of a caretaker. Each jar holds more than leaves. Each is a season, a whisper from a field far away, a field she will likely never see. In the early afternoon, a group of young apprentices arrive, chattering among themselves in voices quick and bird-like. Their sandals slap against the step, and they bow in practiced unison. They are here to deliver a new order of earthen cups from a potter in the next village. One boy, still half a child, holds a tray stacked with cups, so carefully he might be carrying eggs. His cheeks flush with effort and pride. Kiku invites them inside and offers each a small cup of cool barley tea, an offering to cool their flushed faces and restless hearts. They sit awkwardly on the edge of the tatami, giggling under their breath, shooting glances at the simple scroll painting on the wall, a single black brushstroke that might be a mountain ridge or a running river. She does not scold their curiosity. Instead, she encourages them to stay a moment, letting them sip slowly, calming the jittery energy that clings to young bones. After they leave, she stacks the new cups carefully on the shelves. Each shape is slightly different, each lip turned, just a bit uniquely like siblings, all cut from the same earth, yet each born with its own small, quiet defiance. In the late afternoon lull, she sweeps the tatami, gathering fine dust and stray pine needles carried in by sandals. The broom's slow rasp against the mats sounds like distant rain tapping against an old roof. She pauses often, leaning on the broom handle, gazing at the small cracks in the plaster walls. Each crack is a map, a record of countless humid summers and brittle winters. She traces them sometimes with her fingertip, as though trying to read the shape of her life in their crooked lines. Then she prepares a small meal for herself, a bowl of rice topped with thin slices of pickled daikon, a few edamame pods, and a sliver of grilled mackerel. She eats on the back step, feeling the waning sun brush against her face. Children's laughter echoes from a distant alley. A merchant's bell chimes faintly at the street corner. The smell of burning charcoal drifts lazily from a neighbor's kitchen. Kiku chews slowly, savoring each bite as though she is tasting the very heart of the day. The rice feels soft and forgiving, the daikon sharp and clean, the mackerel carrying the deep echo of the sea. She washes her bowl in the small stone basin, humming a half-forgotten folk tune that skips up and down like a playful sparrow. Water splashes in soft arcs, catching the last rays of sun in tiny rainbows. As evening creeps forward, a few late guests appear. One is a middle-aged man with ink-stained fingers and weary eyes. He carries a scroll wrapped tightly under his arm. Another is an older woman, her hair pinned high, face lined with decades of quiet sacrifices. Kiku welcomes them with the same slow bows and warm silences. For the scholar, she selects a deep, earthy sencha that feels like autumn forest floors. For the elder woman, she offers a softer, mellow hojicha that smells faintly of roasted chestnuts as they drink. The tea house transforms into a soft cavern of shadows and flickering lamplight. Conversations hover in half-whispers, regrets folded. Into each exhale, stories of lost brothers, the warmth of an unexpected kindness. Kiku refills each cup with delicate precision. She listens more than she speaks, her presence an unspoken promise that here, for this moment, the world can be held gently, like a fragile tea bowl. When the guests finally bow and leave, they move as though stepping back into a dream they had momentarily escaped. Their shadows stretch long along the street, swallowed slowly by the waiting dark. Kiku slides the wooden door shut and stands for a long moment, her forehead resting against the smooth cedar frame. The warmth of the day seeps from her bones. Replaced by a gentle ache she accepts without complaint. She returns to the hearth to stir the remaining embers. The kettle's final sigh sounds like a weary exhalation at the end of a long story. She lifts it carefully and sets it aside to cool. Wiping her hands slowly on a cloth, she tidies the cups, arranges the new potter's works, checks the tea jars one last time. Her movements grow slower as the evening deepens, each gesture an invitation for the body to follow the mind towards stillness. Finally, she moves to her small sleeping area in the back. She kneels before a tiny family shrine, a simple wooden shelf bearing a small clay fox figurine, a faded photo of her parents, and a slip of paper on which she once wrote a single kanji. Rint endurance. She lights a tiny candle, the flame trembling, as though shy to be seen. She bows 3 times, whispering words that catch in her throat. They are not grand prayers for fortune or long life. They are small thanks for each breath, each sip shared, each stranger who stepped inside and left. A piece of warmth behind Kiku folds herself into her futon, tugging the thin blanket around her shoulders. The night air seeps through the bamboo walls, carrying with it the scent of charcoal fires, distant ocean salt, and plum blossoms beginning to fall from the higher branches. She lies still for a long while, listening to the small orchestra of the town settling into its sleep, dogs barking faintly, the squeak of a lantern being pulled down, a single shakuhachi flute crying softly somewhere in the dark dot as her eyelids grow heavy. Kiku's final thought is of tea leaves drifting in water, swirling, sinking, rising again. She imagines each leaf as a small spirit, carrying messages to the quiet places we visit only in dreams. And so she drifts away, the night folding around her like the embrace of a long-lost friend. Here, dear dreamer, you too can feel the slow breath of the tea house, the warmth of the last cup, the hush of bamboo at your window. Breathe gently now. Let your thoughts settle like tea leaves at the bottom of the cup. Tomorrow, we will continue deeper into Kiku's gentle world, her final season of quiet offerings and small awakenings. The last steam of winter asterisk. Welcome back, dear dreamer. Pull your blanket closer. Let your breath slow and your mind soften, as though you're watching snow fall silently on an empty street. Tonight, we slip once more into Kiku's world, a world of slow embers, careful bows, and secrets folded into each delicate sip. Winter came quietly to the town, not with storms or howling winds, but like a polite guest slipping through the Norran curtain, bowing deeply before settling into a corner. Frost lined the bamboo fence in Kiku's garden. In the early mornings, each breath she took rose into the air in ghostly wisps, vanishing before it reached the moss below. Kiku's routine remained unchanged. She still rose before the first rooster, before the market bells rang down the main street. She slipped from her futon and knelt at her family shrine, bowing low until her forehead nearly touched the floor. Her joints creaked more these days, each motion echoing like a quiet confession. In the dimness, she lit her small candle and whispered her morning thanks. The flame shivered on the clay fox's face, its painted eyes seeming to listen in the hush dot. Her robe, thicker now, smelled faintly of cedar and the sharp scent of dried yuzu peel. She pulled it tighter around her shoulders before slipping out to the garden, her breath trailing behind her. There, she scooped water from the stone basin. The water was so cold, it stung her fingers, but she welcomed this sting, a sharp reminder that she was still here, still breathing, still able to greet another dawn. Back inside, she set her kettle on the hearth. The kettle had become a loyal companion, its small size and soft rattles familiar as an old friend's footfalls. As the water began to warm, she crushed a bit of ginger and added it to her own tea leaves, hoping the warmth would reach her bones more deeply. The first guest that day arrived as a thin stripe of sunlight cut across the tatami. It was an elderly woman who lived alone down the street, her steps careful and deliberate, as if each footfall required negotiation with the earth. She bowed deeply at the door, her breath puffing out like a small white offering. Kiku guided her to the warmest seat near the hearth. She chose a delicate hojicha for her, the roasted aroma weaving into the air, mixing with the smell of pine. From the charcoal, as the old woman sipped, her eyes closed. A single tear escaped, sliding slowly down the map of lines on her face. They didn't speak. In the tea house, words were often unnecessary. Steam rose in small spirals, each swirl a silent poem, each droplet a memory dissolving into the rafters. After the woman left, Kiku stared into the empty cup for a long while. She saw not only the residue of tea, but echoes of 100 mornings, and the hush of all the stories never fully shared. Through that winter, guests continued to come and go. Each arrived bundled in thick coats, scarves wrapped high, faces peeking out like cautious moonflowers at dusk. A rice merchant stopped by, his wide palms cracked from lifting heavy bags. A local teacher brought along a small bundle of pressed camellia petals as a thank you gift. Even a wandering poet appeared one evening, shaking snow from his shoulders, offering nothing but a shy smile and a few coins. Carefully knotted into a handkerchief, Kiku prepared tea for each with the same slow devotion. Each measured scoop of leaves was an act of tenderness, each tilt of the pot a quiet blessing. The tea house itself seemed to breathe around her, the walls gently expanding and contracting with each sigh of the kettle. One late afternoon, as dusk crept across the rooftops like a slow tide, Kiku heard a soft knock. A young girl stood at the door, no older than 12, cheeks flushed red from the cold, holding a thin cloth bundle in her trembling hands. She bowed deeply and said nothing, her eyes fixed on the wooden floor. Kiku nodded, guiding her inside with a soft motion of her hand. Kiku poured her a small cup of sweet amazake, a rice drink meant to warm children. The girl sipped carefully, her small fingers wrapped tightly around the cup, as if afraid it might vanish. When she finished, she set the empty cup down and, without looking up, placed the cloth bundle in front of Kiku. Inside, Kiku found a few dried persimmons and a tiny crooked origami crane. She lifted the crane gently, feeling its fragile folds. She nodded once, deeply, as though the gift carried the weight of 1,000 words. The girl bowed again and slipped away, leaving behind a hush so profound Kiku felt her own heart echo in it. Later that night, Kiku sat by the hearth long after the last guest had left. She placed the origami crane on a small shelf above her kettle. In the flickering light, its shadow danced against the wall, a fragile bird suspended between worlds. Winter nights in the tea house were longer than any poem could capture. Outside, snow piled quietly against the bamboo fence. Inside, Kiku layered more charcoal into the hearth, letting the heat rise slowly. She adjusted her robe, savoring the warmth that moved into her fingers and toes. Sometimes, as she waited for the kettle to sigh, she spoke softly into the room. Little stories about the rice harvest in her mother's village, the first snowfall she ever remembered, a fox she once glimpsed darting through moonlit fields. She did not expect anyone to hear. The tea house listened, as did the shadows. On some nights, she prepared a special cup just for the fox figurine at her shrine. She set it carefully beside the candle, imagining a small spirit sipping in gratitude. Then she would bow 3 times, a rhythm that soothed her, like the rocking of a small boat on a moonlit pond. As winter neared its end, Kiku felt her steps slow even more. Her knees protested each bend, her shoulders bore the silent burden of years. But her hands remained steady. The tea did not tremble when she poured. One morning, a letter arrived from a distant niece she had not seen in decades. The ink was slightly smudged, the handwriting hesitant and leaning. The niece spoke of her own small children, the price of rice, a promise to visit someday when the world felt kinder. Kik, you read it 3 times, her eyes tracing each character as if memorizing a forgotten song. She folded it carefully and tucked it behind the fox figurine, whispering her thanks to ancestors she felt hovering in the steam above her. The final snow fell lightly, like the shedding of old silk robes. Kiku sat by the hearth one last evening, the kettle humming its age-old melody. Her final guests were sparse and quiet, an old fisherman with trembling fingers, a young seamstress with a broken hairpin tucked into her sash. To each, she offered tea with all the grace she could gather, as though it were her final bow on a hidden stage. They left slowly, reluctant to break the hush that wrapped around them like a second winter cloak. When the last guest's sandals faded into the distance, Kiku tidied her hearth. She washed each cup, feeling the gentle echo of each swirl of water. She wiped the kettle, folded the small towels, adjusted the bamboo blinds. Finally, she set a single cup before the fox figurine, added a pinch of her special tea blend, and lit the candle. The flame flickered, illuminating the crane's delicate wings above. She bowed deeply, 3 times, her breath growing softer, each exhale carrying a lifetime of unspoken thanks. That night, she lay in her futon, the blanket pulled high, snow pressed against the bamboo, the moon hid behind drifting clouds. Her eyelids lowered slowly, each blink stretching longer than the last. She dreamed she was walking along a narrow mountain path, lined with plum trees just beginning to bloom. Each step was featherlight, each breath filled with the scent of early spring. She carried a small clay cup, warm in her hands. As she walked, the petals fell gently around her, covering the trail like a silk shawl. She paused at a stream, crouched, and set the cup into the water. It floated away, carrying her warmth downstream into the vast dark dot. She watched until it vanished, then turned to continue up the path, her silhouette merging with the trees. And so, in the quietest hour, Kiku's last sip joined the river of all. Sips before it, drifting into a place beyond lantern light and frost. Tonight, dear listener, as your own breath slows, feel the warmth of her final tea spread through you. You, too, are a guest in her gentle tea house, your heart offered a place by the hearth. Sleep deeply now. May your dreams drift like steam above the winter kettle, carrying you softly toward morning. And now, let's wander to a new corner of forgotten history. Story 3. Saffron Dreams and Silent Lanterns, the spice sellers of old Kashgar, before the caravan bells. Good evening, dear dreamer. Let your shoulders soften, your breath become long and gentle. Tonight, we drift along the old Silk Road, where the wind carries the scent of saffron and cardamom, and caravan bells tinkle softly beneath endless starlight. Our story begins in Kashgar, a city where mountains press close and desert sands sigh at the edges, a place where moonlight dances on tiled rooftops, and the air holds 1,000 secrets, spices, songs, and the hush of countless travelers who paused just long enough to trade stories and silk before moving on again. It is in this city that we find a young spice seller named Zuliha. She rises each morning before the sun tips over the Tian Shan peaks, before the minarets catch their first gold thread of light. She moves through the hushed rooms of her family home like a drifting lantern, her bare feet whispering against cool, worn stone. Her hands reach first for the copper kettle, heavy from years of use. She fills it with water from a clay jar and sets it on the small stove, the embers still warm from her mother's night cooking. As it heats, she unwraps a small bundle of saffron strands, deep red, fragile as a moth's wing, each thread, carrying the promise of sun-drenched fields far beyond the city walls. The water trembles into a rolling boil. Zuliha pinches a few strands of saffron and sprinkles them into the pot. The water blooms into a soft gold, like dawn melting across a still pond. The smell is rich and quiet, a promise of warmth in a world often ruled by sand and wind. While the tea steeps, she steps outside to the small courtyard. There, her father's fig tree stretches its boughs into the pre-dawn dark, leaves curling as if whispering secrets to the stars. Zuliha kneels beside the small fountain and splashes her face, the cold water shocking her into gentle wakefulness. Above, the sky shimmers with the last few stars, the pale blue of morning pushing at the edges. A desert wind drifts in, stirring the lantern that hangs by the gate. It rocks gently, a silent bell marking the unseen hour. Zuliha returns to her tea, pours it into a wide clay bowl, and sips slowly, savoring each swirl of saffron warmth. Each mouthful tastes of the fields her grandmother once described, endless. Rows of purple crocus flowers, petals soft as breath, each flower sheltering a single trembling thread of gold dot. She stands to prepare for the day. The spice shop waits beyond the courtyard gate, a small open front room along the winding bazaar lanes. She selects her scarf, deep indigo today, the color of midnight prayers, and wraps it around her head and neck, her hands moving with practiced grace. Inside the shop, sacks of cumin, coriander, star anise, cinnamon bark, and peppercorns sit in tall stacks. Their scents rise in slow, mingling clouds. She brushes her palms along the tops of the burlap sacks, feeling the subtle textures, coarse pepper against smooth anise, the brittle softness of dried ginger roots. Before customers arrive, lights a small oil lamp and places it in the corner shrine dedicated to travelers and merchants. The shrine holds an old wooden carving of a camel, its nose worn smooth by years of quiet prayers. She bows her head, whispering words her mother taught her, a blessing for safe arrivals, easy bargains, and the slow return of loved ones from distant sands. The first sound of the morning bazaar reaches her, then a distant bleating of sheep, the sharp laugh of a boy chasing a runaway chicken, the rumble of cartwheels carrying bolts of silk or heaps of fresh megranas. As dawn stretches into full light, customers begin to drift past her stall. A baker stops first, his sleeves dusted, white, asking for black cumin and sesame seeds. Zuliha weighs each measure carefully, her fingers moving through the seeds like a slow, comforting chant. Next, a woman buying star anise for her daughter's wedding stew. She picks each star shape carefully, turning them over as if searching for a hidden message in each pointed arm. Zuliha listens quietly to the woman's chatter about dowry linens, guest lists, the best honey for baklava. She smiles, nods, Her own words, gentle and few. By mid-morning, the bazaar becomes a tapestry of movement and scent. A young boy sells figs from a woven basket, calling out in a voice still unsure of its own echo. A group of travelers with sunburned faces ask for rosewater and saffron, bargaining in a swirl of languages that melt into each other like warm honey. Zuliha greets them all with the same calm patience. Her fingers, forever stained with turmeric's soft glow, dance from jar to scale to cloth sack. She remembers every price by heart, every measure by sight. Each transaction feels to her like a brief song, a call and response, a small dance. Between souls, coins pass into her palm, and she presses them gently into a wooden box, the metal clicking softly like distant rain on clay roofs. When a pause comes, she steps back and pours herself another cup of saffron tea. She sips in small, quiet swallows, eyes drifting beyond the lanterns swaying gently overhead. Sometimes, as the bazaar noise rises and falls, she imagines her grandmother's voice telling stories of traders who crossed endless dunes under moonlight, of a lost oasis that appeared once every 100 years, of caravans carrying secret messages wrapped in silks and tied with jasmine threads. In these moments, she feels as though she too is one of those traveling spirits, drifting from heart to heart, cup to cup, seed to seed. Near noon, a man approaches. Her stall with a heavy green cloak and a face lined by wind and salt. He carries a small copper vial, polished so much that it gleams like a second sun. He asks softly for the rarest saffron she can spare. Zulia hesitates. She thinks of her grandmother's stories again, the value of each red thread, how each one is hand-picked in pre-dawn fields, each thread a tiny universe of labor and sunlight. She lifts the small jar from her hidden shelf, uncorks it slowly. The scent that escapes is soft but deep, almost like a hidden harp note vibrating through the air. The man inhales, closes his eyes, and bows his head as if greeting an old friend. She measures 3 careful pinches into his vial. He offers her a heavy coin, and she accepts it without counting, knowing in her heart it is enough. They exchange no more words. He bows again, turns, and disappears into the flowing crowd, his green cloak fading into the river of colors after he leaves. Zuliha sets the jar back in its corner, her fingers lingering on the smooth glass as though touching a memory she dare not disturb. When the afternoon heat begins to press down on the bazaar, she closes the stall halfway and rests in the small back room. There she lies on a thin mat, the stone floor cool beneath her spine. She listens to the distant murmur of the market, to the quiet drip of water from a cracked clay pot, to the faint whisper of the wind chasing stray lanterns in this half-sleep. She dreams of saffron fields again, an endless horizon of purple petals, each flower trembling as if about to speak. She sees her grandmother's hands moving deftly through the blossoms, her laughter ringing like tiny bells tied to a camel's neck. When she wakes, the bazaar still hums, but softer now, as though settling into its own afternoon nap. She rises, adjusts her scarf, and prepares for the second wave of customers. Her fingers smell of cinnamon and cumin. Her eyes hold the quiet gleam of distant stars. And so the day continues. Each hour marked not by clocks or bells, but by the slow dance of spices, the gentle tilt of the sun across her mat, the quiet songs, carried in each bowl of tea. Here, dear listener, as you sink deeper under your blanket, imagine Zuliha's stall, the warm saffron glow, the hush of seeds slipping through fingers, the lanterns rocking softly above. Breathe slowly, like a caravan crossing dunes at night, each step gentle, each pause an invitation to dream. Our story with Zuliha is only just beginning. When you are ready, we will follow her deeper into moonlit bazaars and silent alleyways. Moonlight on the bazaar roof's asterisk, welcome again, gentle listener. Let your eyelids grow heavy, as though the day is slowly folding itself into a silk cloth. Tonight, we follow Zuliha as the sun dips behind the Tian Shan Mountains and the old bazaar exhales its last breath of daylight. When the day's second wave of trade begins, the air has already softened. The harsh cries of morning merchants are replaced by slower, lower voices. The sun slants sideways, turning the dust motes above the stalls into tiny lanterns of gold. Zuliha steps back into her small stall, her hands moving as if guided by moonlight, rather than thought. She lays out cloths of dark indigo and deep crimson, unfolding them like pages in a silent book. On each cloth, she arranges piles of spice, star anise shaped like tiny evening stars, cloves that resemble curled sleeping, cats and black cardamom pods as large as a beetle's shell. A young mother stops by first, her child asleep in a sling at her back. The mother's eyes are lined with exhaustion but glow with a quiet determination. She asks for cinnamon bark to sweeten her rice porridge, and Zuliha picks the pieces one by one, as if selecting driftwood from a moonlit shore. The mother thanks her in a whisper, careful not to disturb the sleeping child. Zuliha bows in return, her own eyes drifting toward the baby's gentle breathing. In that moment, she remembers her grandmother telling her that every breath of a sleeping child carries a prayer for the future. Soon after, an elderly man appears. His spine curves so deeply, he almost folds into the ground. He asks for ginger, not for trade or feast, but for a tea to soothe his aching joints. Zuliha grinds a small amount by hand, the scent sharp and bright, like a cold star hanging above a dark courtyard. She ties it in a piece of cloth, knotting it carefully. As she passes it to him, their hands touch lightly. His skin is thin and dry, like old parchment, but warm with gratitude. The moon rises by degrees above the bazaar rooftops, and lanterns are lit one by one, each flicker a pulse in the growing hush. From her stall, Zuliha can see a small minaret, framed perfectly between two stacked carpets. A single muezzin call floats across the alleys, bending and curling like jasmine smoke as she listens. She feels her own breath sink with the city's long and patient, winding through spice-scented corridors and over the tiled rooftops. A group of boys, each with a different instrument, pass through the bazaar playing a playful tune. There, mismatched notes bounce like sparrows between stalls. One boy stops at Zulia's stall and points shyly at a bundle of dried rose petals. She hands him a small pinch. He runs off laughing, the petals trailing behind him like bits of sunset. Later, a quiet man arrives in a pale blue robe. His voice is so soft that Zuliha leans forward to catch it, her ear nearly brushing the edge of the counter. He asks for the smallest amount of mastic resin that smells faintly of pine and salt wind. She retrieves a small jar from beneath, a cloth, and tilts just enough into his palm to weigh almost nothing. When he leaves, he does not look back. She watches the hem of his robe ripple in the lantern light, as if he is already dissolving into the night air. When there are no customers, Zuliha prepares her own small meal behind the stall. She slices flatbread into thin strips, dips it in a dish of olive oil and sumac, and eats slowly, as though each bite holds a story. She chews with her eyes half closed, listening to the chatter of distant storytellers, the laughter of children returning home, the slow creak of a donkey cart rolling toward a darkened archway. After eating, she tidies the stall again, sweeping. Stray coriander seeds into her palm and tucking them back into their jar. She folds the cloths, their edges smoothed over years of patient touch. Each fold is an unspoken lullaby, a way of soothing the spices before they sleep in their burlap beds. As she finishes, an older woman approaches. Her hair is wrapped in a thin silk scarf, and her hands are ink-stained, perhaps a scribe or a keeper of records. She asks for saffron. Not the common strands, but the oldest and most potent Zuliha keeps hidden behind the carved cedar shelf. Zuliha hesitates, then reaches slowly into the secret jar. She pinches out a few delicate threads, each one almost too fine to see in the lamplight. The woman receives them with both hands cupped, as though holding a bird too fragile to survive. Their eyes meet, and in that gaze, Zuliha feels a quiet kinship to women, each carrying silent stories, inked into their palms and folded into their pockets. As the woman leaves, she murmurs a soft blessing. The words tangle in the spice-laden air and cling to Zuliha's scarf like dew on desert grass. By now, the bazaar thins. The echo of sandal steps recedes into the alleys. Stray cats emerge to sniff at fallen pomegranate seeds and scraps of flatbread. Lanterns sway more boldly now, casting slow-moving shapes against the clay walls. Zuliha stands at the front of her stall, gazing upward. The stars have gathered above the rooftops, burning with a clarity only known to cities born from desert. Sans, she recalls her grandmother's saying, "Stars are the souls, lanterns each, one guiding a lost wish home." Closing her eyes, she can almost hear the footfalls of ancient caravans. Camels with heavy-lidded eyes, traders singing low songs to calm the animals, bells chiming in the moonlit hush. She imagines each grain of spice in her stall as a tiny traveler, carrying the memory of its origin, yearning to be part of someone's meal, someone's warmth, someone's story. Finally, she steps inside to the small room behind her stall. There, she lowers herself onto a thin mat and massages her wrists. Her skin is etched with the invisible lines of countless hours measuring, grinding, stirring. She lights a small oil lamp in the corner. Its glow is gentle, painting the cracked walls in honey tones. The flame flickers, illuminating the jar stacked like sleeping sentinels around her. Before resting, she takes out a small clay bowl. From a hidden pouch inside her sash, she draws out a few last threads of saffron, her own private reserve. She places them carefully in the bowl and pours hot water from a small kettle she keeps by her side. The saffron opens slowly, releasing its golden promise. She lifts the bowl and breathes in deeply. The scent drifts through her mind like a caravan, crossing distant dunes. She sips, each swallow a soft pulse against the quiet dark. She remembers her grandmother again, standing in the wind at dawn, saffron threads drying in the pale sun, her voice singing to the fields in a language older than memory. As she finishes the bowl, Zuliha bows toward the small oil lamp. Her eyes linger on the flame, and for a moment it feels as though she is looking at a distant star reflected in a quiet oasis pool. She murmurs a prayer, not for riches, not for fame, but simply for the strength to keep moving with the next dawn, to keep offering warmth in each measure of spice, to keep weaving small kindnesses into the city's long tapestry. When she lies down, the bazaar beyond has fallen nearly silent. Only a few low voices drift in, muffled by layers of dust and distance. Somewhere, a lute is played in a dim courtyard, the notes drifting upward like wandering fireflies. She closes her eyes, her thoughts dissolving into the saffron warmth that still glows in her chest. Tonight, you too can feel the hush of Kashgar wrapping around you like a spice-scented shawl. Let your breath echo the hush of desert sands, your heartbeat match the slow pulse of lantern light. We will continue Zuli's story soon, tracing her path into the deeper folds of the night. For now, rest gently in this moonlit corner of the old Silk Road. The lantern beyond the archway, asterisk. Welcome back, gentle friend. Feel your breath flow like a slow desert breeze. Let your mind loosen its hold, as though drifting down a narrow alley lit only by wavering lanterns. Tonight, we walk further with Zuliha, into the echo of the night and the hidden corners of her saffron-scented life. The dawn after the long moonlit bazaar feels thin and translucent, like the first delicate petal of an apricot blossom. Zulia opens her eyes before the city fully wakes, hearing only the small scurry of a cat outside her wooden door and the soft hush of her own heart. She sits up slowly, as though rising from a deep pool. Her mat beneath her has molded gently. To her shape, the thin cotton coverlet warmed by her dreams of endless dunes and star-drenched caravans. In the small room behind the stall, the last oil lamp flickers on the edge of extinction. She cups her hand around it, whispering a small greeting, as if to an old friend who waited all night to keep her company. Outside, the first call to prayer lifts into the pale morning. The sound is thin, quivering at the edges, but it carries, far over the tiled roofs and narrow stone alleys. Zuliha listens with her eyes closed, each note threading softly through the fabric of her thoughts. She rises to wash her face in a chipped clay basin, the water cool and slightly metallic from the old well. She splashes her cheeks, then presses her damp palms against her eyes. In that darkness, she sees flashes of color, the deep crimson of saffron, the warm brown of cinnamon bark, the pale moon yellow of ground turmeric. When she lowers her hands, she feels her heartbeat soften. She lights a small brazier, feeding it slivers of dried apricot wood. The smoke rises in slow ribbons, sweet and resinous. Into a tiny pot, she drops a few dried rose petals and a small spoonful of saffron. The petals collapse, curling like shy dancers, and the saffron releases its golden hue. She pours the tea into her clay bowl and sips slowly. Each mouthful feels like a quiet embrace, as if each swallow seals a tiny promise between her and the day. Stepping into the courtyard, she watches the fig tree shake off droplets of dew. A few stubborn leaves still cling to its twisted branches, each one etched with the quiet memory of summer sun. At the base of the tree, a thin cat curls, its fur rippling like silk in a breeze. Zuliha kneels beside the cat, offering her palm. The cat opens one eye, considers her silently, then stretches, and rests its head against her wrist. For a long moment, they remain still, two quiet creatures sharing the fragile warmth of early morning. At last, she stands and gathers her scarf. Today, a pale shade of saffron, dyed by her own hand seasons ago, wrapping it around her head. She feels the gentle weight of each knot, the slight tug against her temples, grounding her in the bazaar. The day starts slowly. Vendors shuffle out with heavy crates of grapes, melons, pomegranates. A young boy hurries past with a tray of fresh flatbread balanced on his head, the smell trailing behind like a sunbeam. Zuliha opens her stall, sweeping the stones at its entrance. She sets her jars and sacks in a careful pattern, each spice given its place as if laying out a small family of sleeping children. By midday, the bazaar begins to swell with noise and color. Travelers from distant lands wander through, their faces sun-chapped and eyes wide with curiosity. Traders speak in at least 4 different languages at once, their words bubbling like a hot spring. A woman from Samarkand approaches, her robe shimmering like a pond in moonlight. She asks for cloves and dried rose petals to scent her wedding linens. Zuliha selects each clove gently, as if lifting tiny bells from a temple floor. When she hands the bundle to the woman, they share a look, one filled with unspoken stories of kitchens, candlelight, and the hush before a new life begins. Next comes a man with thick silver rings on every finger, who buys long pepper and crushed sumac. He tells her, in a voice rough as gravel, of his journey from the western edges of the Taklamakan desert. He describes sand so fine it crawls into every fold of clothing, and stars so bright they seem close enough to pluck like ripe figs. Zuliha listens, her eyes moving over the lines on his face like a scholar tracing an ancient map. She hands him his packet of spices, nodding deeply, honoring the quiet courage behind each mile he described, as afternoon light turns the bazaar into a tapestry of soft gold. A troupe of performers weaves through the lanes, dancers in flowing blue sashes, musicians beating small goatskin drums, a singer whose voice ripples like silk in wind. They pause before Zuliha's stall, the singer tilting her head as though hearing a distant echo. Without a word, she begins a gentle song, her voice carrying over the cumin and cinnamon, threading around the heavy air. Zuliha closes her eyes, feeling the sound settle into her bones. She offers the singer a small cone of rose sugar, wrapped in a paper fold. The singer accepts it with a bow so deep it seems to touch the earth itself. After they drift away, Zuliha stands a moment longer, her fingertips lightly tracing the edges of her jars, as though steadying herself in the afterglow of that sudden music. When twilight edges in, lanterns blink alive above the bazaar lanes, casting a soft honey-colored glow. The day's energy shifts, voices drop lower, steps grow slower, even the spices seem to exhale, their scent turning rounder and warmer. A young scholar stops at her stall, then. He wears a dark robe and carries a thin brush tucked into his sash. He asks for a small jar of saffron, not to cook with, but to use as pigment for illuminated manuscripts. Zuliha's eyes brighten. She opens her secret jar, lifting a few delicate strands with a wooden spoon. She shows him how the threads turn water to a deep golden light, a color that glows in candlelit rooms for centuries. They talk quietly about scrolls and old ink recipes. For a fleeting moment, Zuliha feels as though she is not in the bazaar at all, but sitting by a hidden oasis. Each word a ripple on the water's surface. When he leaves, he presses a folded slip of paper into her hand. Inside, she finds a tiny poem, lantern above archway. Saffron moon drips to earth, night tastes of honey. She presses the slip to her lips before tucking it into her sash, her heart echoing the lines like a drum in an empty room. Night descends fully now. The bazaar quiets until only whispers and sandal scuffs remain. Stray dogs curl beneath empty stalls. A lonely oud song drifts from a distant corner, its notes stumbling into the darkness like a sleepwalker. Zuliha closes her stall, moving slowly, folding each cloth with a reverence that feels like prayer. She stacks the jars carefully, each one resting in its place as though returning home after a long journey in the back room. She lights her final oil lamp and sits cross-legged on her mat. She lifts her clay bowl and pours one last measure of saffron tea. The golden swirl glows faintly in the lamp's breath. She drinks it in slow sips, each one a thread that stitches her spirit to the vast tapestry of the Silk Road, to the old stories that drift along the desert winds, to the quiet dreams of every traveler who passed her stall. When the bowl is empty, she bows to it 3 times, a soft, silent ceremony for all that has come and gone. She lies down at last, her hands resting lightly on her chest. Through the cracks in the wooden door, a thin moonbeam stretches across the floor, touching the edge of her scarf, the jars, the quiet corners where forgotten wishes gather like dust. In her final waking thoughts, she sees again the saffron fields of her grandmother's stories, purple petals shivering at dawn, each thread a small sun waiting to be born. She imagines her breath drifting out to join the caravan songs, the lantern flickers, the hidden poems folded into traveler's sashes. Tonight, dear friend, let your own thoughts drift with her. Let the saffron warmth wrap around your heart like a soft shawl, and follow the moonlit alleyways beyond the archway into dreams where no footsteps echo too loudly. Rest now. The bazaar will still be waiting tomorrow, its jars of spice heavy with untold tales, its lanterns trembling with tiny golden secrets. Sleep deeply, traveler of the quiet night. And now, let's gently drift into another corner of history. Story 4. The Indigo Whispers, cloth dyers of medieval Mali beneath the indigo moon. Good evening, gentle dreamer. Rest your head upon your pillow, as though settling into a field of soft, waving grass under a warm Saharan breeze. Tonight, we drift far from Kashgar's lanterns and spices, following the slow, careful footsteps of dyers in medieval Mali, beneath skies inked with endless stars. Imagine a river winding like a blue ribbon across the hot savanna, the Niger River. Wide and patient, its banks lined with reeds and the gentle chatter of evening crickets. Along its muddy edges, small clusters of homes sit in tight circles, their mud walls cool even when the sun stands high and fierce. In one of these villages lives a woman named Fatoumata, a master dyer of indigo cloth. Before the sun even breathes its first light over the dunes, she rises from her sleeping mat. The room is dark, save for a faint glow from a clay oil lamp that flickers, painting soft shapes on the curved walls. She moves like water, fluid, quiet, determined. First, she scoops water from a clay jug to wash her face and hands. The water is cool, its surface trembling as if holding 1,000 tiny secrets. Fatoumata closes her eyes, feeling each droplet slip along her skin like whispered blessings. Her hands are strong but fine, shaped by years of soaking, wringing, and tying cloth. Each finger mapped with indigo stains that will never fully leave. The dark blue, so deep it almost looks black at night, is her badge of patience and persistence. Outside her small hut, the village is still, but the air hums with the promise of day. A rooster calls from somewhere beyond the millet fields, its cry echoing like a conch shell. Fatoumata steps onto the hard-packed earth, her bare feet greeting the cold dawn ground. She walks to the courtyard, where the dyeing pits wait large clay basins sunk into the earth, each lined with the deep dark residue of 100 dye baths. Before, above them, bundles of cotton cloth hang from wooden beams. limp and pale, like sleeping moths waiting to awaken into color. Fatoumata checks each vat with care. She dips her hand into the first, feeling its temperature, stirring slowly so the liquid does not startle awake too fast. The indigo dye is alive in its way, a subtle breathing spirit that demands patience. Each vat is like a shallow moonlit pond, shimmering in the half-light of dawn. When the dye is ready, she prepares the cloth for immersion. Each piece is carefully folded, tied or knotted depending on the patterns she plans to reveal. Her grandmother taught her the names of each motif: the river's teeth, tortoise shell, rain call, each one a story carried. Through generations, she remembers her grandmother's voice even now, soft as wind over water. Indigo is a jealous friend. It loves you if you are patient, but it betrays those who rush. Fatoumata hums as she works. Her voice flows low and steady, weaving with the hush of the morning breeze. The tune is an old one, a song of the river spirits, of women who sang to the moon so their dye would hold fast. One by one, she dips the cloth into the dark liquid. At first, each piece emerges a sickly green, a soft, almost otherworldly hue. Only when the cloth touches air does it bloom into deep indigo, as if breathing for the first time. Fatoumata lifts each piece slowly, her arms trembling slightly under the wet weight. She watches as the air works its quiet magic, the blue deepening. With every heartbeat, she hangs the cloth from the beams, and they sway slightly, like sails waiting for a wind that will never come. Other women begin to gather in the courtyard as the sun rises. They carry large baskets of cotton, hands rough from harvest, eyes bright despite the early hour. They greet Fatoumata with gentle words and small bows, for she is a respected dyer. Her indigo is known even in distant markets of Jen and Timbuktu. They work together in near silence. The only sounds the occasional splash of water, the creak of wooden beams, and the soft murmur of shared breath. In this slow dance of fingers and fabric, there is no hurry, no harshness, only the steady rhythm of craft shaped by earth and sky. As the sun rises higher, children appear along the edges of the courtyard, peeking shyly behind pots and low fences. They watch the transformation with wide eyes, giggling when Fatoumata pretends to chase them away with dripping blue hands. She smiles at them, her teeth bright against the blue smudges on her cheeks. In these small exchanges, the dyeing becomes more than labor. It becomes a quiet festival, a day painted in laughter and whispered songs. At midday, the women gather under a large baobab tree, its roots sprawling like an ancient hand gripping the earth. They share bowls of millet porridge, honeyed yams, and small cups of sweet hibiscus tea. Fatoumata sits among them, her scarf pulled back so the breeze can cool her damp forehead. They speak in low tones of their families, of husbands traveling with salt caravans to the north, of children learning to herd goats or carve wooden flutes. Between words, they watch the cloth sway in the breeze, blue upon blue, like 1,000 small skies strung overhead. Fatoumata sips her tea slowly, her mind wandering to the market day coming soon in Jen. She imagines the rows of bright indigo cloth stretched out on woven mats, traders from across the Sahel leaning close to touch the fine weave, their eyes narrowing with admiration. She imagines the silver coins pressed into her palm, heavy with promise. But more than wealth, it is the recognition she yearns for, the quiet nod from another dyer, the unspoken acknowledgement of her skill, the secret solidarity passed in a fleeting glance. After the meal, she returns to the vats. The afternoon. Sun turns the clay basins into small mirrors, reflecting fragments of sky and the shifting shadows of women passing by. She takes each piece of cloth down carefully, folding and twisting it again if needed, dipping it back into the dye for deeper hues. Each plunge is a negotiation between cloth and dye, between earth and spirit, between patience and desire. The repetition becomes a meditation. Fatoumata's mind drifts far beyond the courtyard walls, to her grandmother's hut near the river, to the first time she dipped her hands into indigo as a girl, to the quiet shock of watching white cloth bloom into blue in her own small palms. She recalls her grandmother's laugh, low and rolling, when she stained her first dress by accident. How the old woman clapped her hands and said, "Now the spirits have chosen you. You belong to the blue." At times, the memory makes her chest ache, but she embraces it, letting it ripple through her like wind across a millet field. When the final cloths are hung and the vats are covered for the night, the courtyard is bathed in an amber glow. The sun has dipped low, casting long shadows that stretch like slow-moving rivers across the earth. Fatoumata cleans her tools with care, wiping each wooden stick, each ceramic spoon, as though they are trusted elders. She wraps her indigo-stained fingers around a clay water jug and drinks deeply, the coolness sliding down her throat like a comforting song. She feels the tiredness seep into her muscles, the slow, sweet heaviness that comes from a day spent crafting. Something true in the quiet between the last chores and evening prayers. She stands before the hanging cloths, her eyes half closed. The pieces sway gently, each one a whispered promise to the moon above. She raises her hands and sings again. The river song, the moon song, the hush song of her grandmother. Her voice floats upward, twisting around the blue cloth, around the baobab branches, up into the first stars flickering in the darkening sky. Tonight, as you listen, imagine standing beside her in that courtyard. Feel the hush of twilight gathering around your shoulders like a soft indigo shawl. Hear the slow creak of cloth on wooden beams, the hum of cicadas merging with Fatoumata's song. Your breath, like hers, can move as slowly as a drifting river. Your thoughts can settle like moonlight on still water. Fatoumata's story is not yet finished. Tomorrow, she will walk to market with her blue bundles balanced on her head, her heart full of hope and ancient songs. For now, rest. Let the indigo night enfold you. Listen to the echo of a river beyond the dunes. The road to Jen rests deeper now, dear friend. Imagine your breathing settling like fine dust after a caravan passes. Each inhale and exhale softer than the ripple of reeds along the Niger. Let us walk beside Fatoumata as she prepares to leave. Her indigo-scented courtyard for the fabled market of Jen, a city that shimmers at the edge of the river like a mirage caught between sky and earth, long before dawn. Fatoumata rises. Her room is filled with the scent of clay walls cooled by night, the faint sweetness of dried hibiscus petals hung in a corner. She rolls her mat, wraps her indigo-stained scarf around her head, and pauses to listen. Outside, the world is still, half asleep, the hush broken only by the distant croak of a frog, or the low grunt of a cow shifting in its sleep. In the glow of a small oil lamp, she bundles the finished cloths. Each piece is folded so that the patterns remain hidden, known only to her hands. To the untrained eye, it may seem like plain bundles of dark cloth, but Fatoumata knows each fold carries a secret, each layer a story whispered across countless nights. She ties the bundles tightly with lengths of palm fiber rope. As she does, she murmurs a blessing her grandmother taught her. May the river carry your color into the hearts of those who see you. Once the bundles are secured, she balances them atop her head. The weight presses gently into her crown, her neck muscles strong from years of carrying water, wood, and dye. She steps into the courtyard, where a thin mist clings to the earth like a ghost from an old story. In the mist, the baobab tree stands sentinel, its roots spreading outward like an open hand cradling secrets. Fatoumata closes her eyes and offers a small bow to the tree, as she does every time she begins a journey. The air is cool against her skin, and each breath feels like a quiet promise. She joins a small group of women at the village edge, each with their own bundles, woven baskets of dried fish, gourds of honey, clay pots. They greet one another softly, as though afraid to disturb the dreams still lingering in the fields around them. Then they set out along the dusty road. The path to Jen is long, winding through millet fields, past shallow ponds where stand still as statues. Sometimes the wind stirs and carries with it the scent of wood smoke from a distant homestead, or the faint tents of river mud. Their bare feet stir tiny spirals of dust that follow behind like pale spirits, as they walk. The sun rises, painting the sky in ribbons of saffron and rose. Each step feels measured and ritualistic, a pilgrimage as much as a market journey. The road itself becomes a kind of loom, weaving their stories into the morning air. Fatoumata listens to the conversations around her. One woman speaks of her son learning to shape calabash gourds, another of her sister's wedding plans, and another wonders if the rains will arrive early this season. Their voices weave a tapestry of daily life, each word an unhurried stitch in a garment worn by the whole community. Midway to Jen, they reach a shallow stream. Fatoumata stops to rest, laying her bundles on a smooth rock. She kneels and cups water into her mouth, its taste sharp and refreshing. In the reflection, she sees her face softened by fatigue and the indigo stains on her hands, like constellations scattered across her skin. Nearby, an elder woman is braiding a young girl's hair into tight, intricate patterns. The girl winces at each tug, but her eyes gleam with pride. Fatoumata smiles, remembering when her grandmother would braid her hair, humming stories of spirits that lived in the river reeds and the shimmering ancestors who guided their dye vats. When the break ends, they rise again. The sun has climbed higher, pressing a gentle heat against their shoulders. Dust sticks to the edges of their feet, turning them the color of the road itself. At last, the city of Jen rises on the horizon. Its great mosque, made from sunbaked earth and wood scaffolds, looks like a vast sandcastle built by giants. The walls ripple with texture, every beam and curve speaking of hundreds of hands smoothing mud under the gaze of the sun. As they enter the city, the road transforms. Traders spill into the streets, calling out in many languages: Soninke Fulani, Arabic. The air thickens with the smells of roasted peanuts, dried dates, and simmering yam stews. Colors bloom everywhere: bright scarves, patterned skirts, leather sandals, dyed crimson and gold. Fatoumata feels her pulse rise, a bright flame in her chest. Despite her years of dyeing, each market day carries the electric thrill of possibility, the chance that someone will see her cloth, trace its patterns with reverent fingers, and carry a piece of her river spirit home. She finds a corner near a shaded arcade, carefully laying out her indigo cloths on woven mats. As she unfolds each piece, The blue flashes under the sun, deeper and more mysterious than a midnight pool. People pause, drawn in as though by a sudden hush in a crowded room. A woman in a pale yellow wrapper stops first. She reaches out with trembling fingers, grazing the fabric's surface. Her eyes widen, and she asks in a hushed voice if the pattern is tortoise shell, a motif known to bless journeys and protect the wearer's spirit. Fatoumata nods, explaining how the knots were tied, how many times it was dipped, and the songs sung during each soak. The woman listens as though hearing a bedtime story. Finally, she folds the cloth carefully, places silver coins in Fatoumata's palm, and presses her forehead to the fabric before tucking it into her basket. Next, a group of young men approach. They buy small strips of cloth to tie around their wrists and foreheads, charms against bad spirits on long camel treks. One of them laughs and claims he will wear his to ensure victory in a wrestling match. Fatoumata chuckles softly, her laughter blending with the rustle of cloth and the murmur of bargaining voices all around. By midday, her mat is crowded with people. Some come to admire, some to buy, some simply to hear her describe the patterns and the river stories woven into each thread. A storyteller, his voice deep and smooth as polished wood, stops beside her. He asks for a scrap of cloth to wrap around his talking drum. As Fatoumata cuts a narrow strip, he recites a short praise poem to her daivats and to the ancestors who taught her patience. When he leaves, she feels as though a blessing has settled on her shoulders, light as morning. Mist between sails, she sips cool water from a gourd, watching the sun dance on the mosque walls. Her gaze wanders across other vendors, a woman selling kola nuts in small woven baskets, a blacksmith hammering delicate crescent-shaped earrings, an old man arranging slabs of salt from the distant desert. Each seller, she thinks, holds a piece of the world in their hands. As afternoon deepens, she sees a group of musicians gathering under an acacia tree. Drums throb softly, a kora plucks its gentle arpeggios, and voices join in, weaving a slow, circular song. Fatoumata hums along, her mind drifting to the steady rhythm of dying, the dips and lifts, the breathing cloth, the ghostly green that becomes a deep night sky. A young girl appears shyly at her mat, eyes huge above her sun-bleached tunic. She carries a single small coin and asks if she can buy even a scrap of indigo to make a doll's dress. Fatoumata smiles and hands her a piece far larger than she paid for. The girl gasps, eyes shining, and runs off to show her friends as the sun slants lower, painting the world in honey and rose. Fatoumata begins to pack her remaining cloths. She counts her coins, their weight heavy and comforting in her palm. But she also carries something else, each smile, each whispered story, each careful hand that touched her work. Before leaving, she circles the market one last time, exchanging soft greetings and small bundles of millet cakes with friends. At a food stall, she trades a scrap of indigo for a handful of roasted groundnuts, savoring each warm, earthy bite. As she exits Jen, the city fades into twilight. The mosque glows like an ember against the sky, and the Niger shivers with the last reflections of day. Fatoumata balances her now lighter bundles, the path home long but familiar. The road darkens, the first stars peeking shyly through the indigo canopy above. Crickets begin their steady chorus, a lullaby for travelers. Each step feels measured, like the slow beat of a drum in a distant village square. Fatoumata thinks of her grandmother, her river songs, the quiet mystery of cloth becoming more than cloth. In each thread, she feels the river's memory, the tug of current, the whisper of fish. the moonlight trembling across shallow water. She knows she will return tomorrow or next week to Jen. And each time, she will carry a piece of her spirit in those blue threads. Each one a small echo of sky and water and story. Tonight, as she walks, let your own breath fall into rhythm with hers. Feel the gentle sway of her bundles, the hush of night gathering around her like a soft indigo cloak. Your mind may wander, as hers does, along moonlit rivers and old songs echoing through reeds. Let those thoughts drift freely, no need to tie them down. Sleep softly now, friend, under the same stars that watch over Fortunatus Road. The night vat and the river's lullaby, welcome back, gentle friend. Let your eyelids grow heavy, like the weighted ends of freshly dyed cloths swaying in a warm breeze. Tonight, we return to Fatoumata after her long road home from Jen. A journey full of echoes, dust, and the soft hush of ancient songs still humming under her breath. When Fatoumata arrives back in her village, the sky is already a deep purple, like the first stirrings of indigo in a dye pot. Lanterns flicker. In doorways, small points of golden warmth against the spreading night. Children run through the lanes, their laughter sharp as bird calls, weaving around goats settling down for sleep. She steps into her courtyard, the earth cool beneath her tired feet. Her bundles, now lighter, seem to breathe out small sighs as she sets them down. She washes her hands in a shallow basin, watching the water swirl darkly as it carries away the day's dust and faint traces of indigo. Inside her hut, she lights a small oil lamp and unrolls her mat. But tonight, sleep does not claim her immediately. The air is filled with a soft, restless energy, like the river during its high season. Swollen and murmuring to itself under the moonlight, she sits cross-legged, holding a strip of leftover indigo cloth. Between her fingers, it feels alive, a pulse from another world, a story still unfolding. She remembers the young girl in Jen, her eyes gleaming above her small coin. She recalls the old storyteller who wrapped a strip around his drum, and the quiet joy in each exchange. After a while, she rises and steps outside again. The moon has climbed higher, a pale eye watching over the village. She crosses the courtyard to her vats, the dye basins slumbering under their cloth covers. Tonight, she decides to wake one. Carefully, she folds back the cloth, revealing the dark, glimmering liquid. By moonlight, the vat looks like a shallow piece of the night sky, sprinkled faintly with drifting stars. She dips her fingers in gently, stirring in slow circles. The liquid curls around her knuckles, cool and heavy, like a lover's slow embrace. She pulls her hand out, watching the drops fall back with soft plashes. In that moment, she feels her grandmother's presence, as though the old woman is sitting right beside her. Humming the river song. Fatoumata begins to hum too. The tune is low, round as a gourd, winding through the night air and up toward the stars. It is a song of thanks to the river that gives life, to the sky that blesses each dawn, to the hidden spirits in the dye that turn humble cotton into a piece of the sky itself. She prepares a new piece of cloth, folding and knotting it carefully. Her fingers move slowly, each twist deliberate, each tuck a small prayer. When she finishes, she lowers it into the vat, feeling the cloth disappear into the night's quiet heart. She lifts it again, watching as it breathes in the air and changes color. That magical moment, green melting into deep blue fields, like watching moonlight turn the river into silver. She repeats the process again and again, each dip and lift a patient meditation, each unfolding moment a gentle echo of breath. All around her, the village sleeps, but she feels more awake than ever, her spirit humming in time with the cloth's slow transformation. Fireflies drift by in small glowing flocks, their light blinking softly in the still air. At the courtyard's edge, the baobab tree stands as a silent witness. Its broad roots hold centuries of stories, its branches brushing the edge of the stars. Fatoumata feels the tree's ancient breath, a silent blessing that moves through her veins like warm dye. She pauses between dips to drink water from a clay cup, each swallow grounding her in the soft night. She thinks of the river, of the path to Jen, of the women who walked beside her, of the conversations stitched between steps. All these memories swirl within her, settling like silt in a calm pool. Hours pass without her noticing. The moon slides slowly across the sky, and the first hints of dawn begin to pale the eastern edge. Birds stir in their nests, and the village starts to whisper itself awake. Fatoumata finishes the last dip, wrings out the cloth gently, and hangs it on the wooden beam. It sways lightly, catching the first tentative fingers of morning light. She watches it, her breath falling into a long, quiet rhythm. She covers the vat again and steps back. Her hands, wrists, and forearms are covered in dark stains, but she feels no urge to scrub them clean. These stains are her story, her lineage, her quiet oath to the river and sky. Inside her hut, she finally sits down. She pours the last of her hibiscus tea into a small clay bowl. It is cool and tart, and it feels like a final chord after a long, quiet song. She rests her head against the wall, the mat warm beneath her. Outside, she can hear the village awakening, the gentle creak of gates, soft voices calling to goats, the clatter of pots starting the morning meal. But in this small space, she carries a hush, a private twilight that stretches between her ribs and down into her palms. She closes her eyes, letting her mind wander to the market, to the young girl, to the storyteller's poem, to her grandmother's laughter echoing over the river. Each thought floats past her, light as a drifting petal on the water's surface. When she dreams, she is by the riverbank. The moon hangs low, and the water shines with an impossible blue. She sees the cloth stretched across the surface, shimmering, like a path to the other side of the world. She steps forward, feeling the mud slip between her toes. She lifts the cloth in her hands and wraps it around her shoulders. The river breeze lifts her hair, cool and fragrant with reeds and moonlight. She hears a song rising hers, and not hers, old and new all at once. The melody twists around the stars, finds the edges of the sky, and then folds quietly into her chest. In the dream, she smiles. The indigo night accepts her, holds her close, and whispers, "You are home." Back in her hut, the village continues, waking. Smoke rises from cooking fires, and children begin to chase each other through the dusty lanes. The baobab watches, patient and serene, its roots deep in memory. Fatoumata stirs lightly, her breath slow and even, her hands resting on her belly, stained and beautiful. In the coming days, she will prepare more cloth, walk again to Jen, tell her stories, hear new ones, and add new songs to her quiet collection. For now, she sleeps. And in that sleep, her spirit drifts like a quiet canoe on the moonlit river, slipping past reeds and small glowing fish, beneath the gaze of ancestors waiting on the far bank. Tonight, dear friend, let your thoughts move gently too. Let them unfold and twist like knots in soft cotton. Let them wash and breathe in the cool night air. There is no rush, no end, only the slow bloom of blue in the moon's patient glow. Rest your eyes. Listen to the river in your own heart. Tomorrow will come, and your own market songs will wait for you. Sleep now under this shared indigo sky. The stories are here, waiting, whispering, always ready to guide you deeper into the night's calm embrace. And now, let's drift softly toward the next story. Story 5. What Wild West Saloon Madams Actually Did to Survive *. Good evening, friend. Settle in beneath your warmest blanket. Dim your lights to a soft glow, like the flicker of a lantern in a far-off frontier town. Let your breath grow steady, your thoughts slow. Tonight, we walk softly beside a group of women whose lives were woven through dust, wood, and whiskey. The saloon madams of the American Wild West. The air carries a dry heat, the faint scent of leather and pine smoke. Imagine a small town, its streets a ribbon of dirt stretching beneath vast, open skies. Here, the clatter of horses' hooves echoes in the distance, mingling with the muted chatter from wooden boardwalks and swinging doors. In this rough landscape, saloons stand like oases, rough-hewn structures, alive with muted laughter, the clink of glasses, and the soft scrape of piano keys. But beyond their lively fronts, these places were also shelters and battlegrounds. And at the heart of each was a madam, a woman who managed the swirling tides of hope, hardship, and survival. Tonight, we follow the footsteps of one such woman, Clara. Belle, known to locals simply as Belle, whose story is embroidered with quiet courage and a sharp mind. She was neither born into wealth nor privilege, but her eyes held the spark of determination that would carry her through the dusty streets and endless nights of the West. Belle's day begins before dawn, when the town is still wrapped in shadows and silence. The sun's first pale light filters softly through the wooden slats of her modest home, casting long, gentle stripes across the floor. The air is cool, smelling faintly of cedar and brewed coffee. She rises slowly, moving with practiced grace despite the weariness of a life lived on edge. Her hands are steady as she tends to her morning rituals, pouring a small cup of coffee, folding the clean linens she has carefully prepared for the day ahead. The saloon will soon wake, its doors swinging wide to greet travelers, miners, cowboys, and lost souls alike. But before the bustle begins, Belle walks through her rooms, touching the familiar walls as if drawing strength from their worn surfaces. Her parlor is quiet now, but it holds the faint echo of laughter and whispered conversations. The velvet curtains are drawn, muffling the noise of the street beyond. On the mantel rests a small photograph, her mother, stern and kind, a reminder of the past Belle carries with her like a talisman. Outside, the town slowly stirs. Horses neigh softly, wagon wheels creak against the hard-packed earth, and a distant train whistle calls through the valley. Belle breathes in the rising day, feeling the pulse of a world forever shifting beneath her feet. Her first task is the saloon's ledger, thick book filled with names, debts, and promises written in careful script. She checks the accounts with a steady eye, balancing numbers with a precision born of necessity. In these pages lie the stories of countless souls who have passed through her doors, each line a quiet testament to survival. By mid-morning, Belle is ready to face the day's challenges. She dresses simply but with purpose, a faded dress of sturdy fabric, boots worn soft by countless steps, and a shawl wrapped tightly against the dry wind. The walk to the saloon is a ritual in itself. She passes by the blacksmith's shop, the general store with its wooden sign creaking in the breeze, and the dusty square where townsfolk gather for news and gossip. As she pushes open the saloon's heavy doors, the scent of polished wood, tobacco, and aged whiskey embraces her. The room hums with a low energy, a simmering blend of anticipation and quiet. Resilience. Belle moves through the space like a conductor, her presence commanding yet calm. She greets the bartenders, checks the preparation of the tables, and exchanges brief nods with the women who work alongside her keepers of the delicate balance between welcome and wary. Protection. The saloon is more than a place of drink and song. It is a refuge for those seeking warmth, companionship, or simply a momentary escape from the harshness beyond the doors. And it is a place where Belle's sharp mind and steady heart must navigate unspoken rules and unseen dangers. Throughout the day she listens to the stories shared over mugs of ale, to the whispered negotiations in shadowed corners, to the laughter that carries hints of hope and sorrow. Each moment is a thread in the tapestry she weaves, a quiet assertion of control in a world that offers little certainty as twilight descends. Casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards, the saloon transforms. Lamps flicker to life there. Golden glow softening the edges of a world carved from wood and stone. Music begins to fill the room, a slow, familiar tune that invites worn souls to dance or dream. Belle watches from behind the bar, her eyes tracing the faces of those who have come seeking comfort or distraction. She moves with gentle authority, ensuring safety, smoothing tensions, and preserving the fragile sanctuary she has created. Her story, like those of many madams, is not one of glamour or spectacle, but of quiet strength, the steady work of survival, the careful tending of community in a place where both were scarce. Tonight, as you rest, imagine walking beside Belle through these wooden halls, hearing the soft murmur of life unfolding slowly around you. Feel the weight of history pressing lightly, the hush of countless nights like this one. Held in the breath between dawn and sleep, the story continues, waiting to be told in the softest of whispers and the slowest of steps. The quiet power behind the birthday deepens slowly, folding itself like a soft blanket over the small frontier town where Clara Belle's saloon stands. The sunlight, warm yet softened by a gentle haze of dust and smoke, drapes the wooden buildings in honeyed tones. From inside the saloon, the murmur of conversation blends with the occasional clink of glass and the faint melody of a piano playing somewhere near the back. Belle moves through the room with quiet purpose. Her presence is both a bomb and a shield, a steadying force in a world full of unpredictable tempests. She knows every face here, every whispered worry, every unspoken hope. She has learned, over the years, that survival is less about loud declarations and more about subtle, measured influence. Behind the polished bar, Belle's hands work steadily pouring drinks, sliding small coins across the counter, exchanging brief smiles that hold entire conversations in their silence. The saloon is a fragile ecosystem, and she is its careful gardener, tending to its needs without disturbing the delicate balance. Each morning, she has checked the ledger, making sure the books are balanced. But this afternoon, her attention is drawn to a small, folded piece of paper left on the counter, a note from a traveler, a warning, or perhaps a plea. She unfolds it gently, the paper crackling softly like dried leaves underfoot. The words are few but heavy. Beware the storm coming from the north. Belle's eyes narrow slightly, but her voice remains calm when she shares the news with her trusted circle, They speak in hushed tones, knowing that sometimes the greatest strength is in restraint, in knowing when to listen rather than act. Outside, the town carries on, unaware of the undercurrents swirling just beneath the surface. Children play in the dusty street, their laughter ringing clear and bright. A dog barks in the distance, and the blacksmith hammers steadily, sparks flying like tiny stars from his anvil. Belle steps onto the creaking porch for a moment, letting the warm breeze wash over her. The sun dips lower now, casting long shadows that stretch like fingers across the town square. She breathes deeply, tasting the mingled scents of pine smoke and earth, feeling the steady heartbeat of a place built on hope and hardship. Inside, the piano shifts to a slow, melancholy tune. Patrons begin to settle in for the evening, their faces softened by the fading light and the promise of rest. Belle watches, her thoughts drifting like the dust motes caught in the amber glow. She knows that survival here is a daily act of quiet, courage, a dance between danger and grace. And as the night folds around her, she carries that knowledge close, a hidden flame burning steady in the heart of the Wild West. Asterisk, the soft murmur of voices rises and falls like a gentle tide, weaving through the low-ceilinged room where Belle moves with practiced ease. Each face she sees carries a story, a thread of hardship, hope, or quiet desperation stitched into the worn fabric of frontier life. The saloon is both refuge and crossroads, a place where dreams and dangers mingle beneath flickering gas lamps and the faint haze of tobacco smoke. Belle's hands, steady and sure, pour whiskey with care, neither too fast nor too slow, offering solace in a glass to men hardened by days on the trail and nights under open skies. She listens more than she speaks, her eyes watching for the small signs, a clenched jaw, a flicker of hesitation, a tremor in a voice. Tonight, the piano plays a slow, familiar tune, a song carried from New Orleans, brought west on the rails, now softened by countless renditions and the lilt of prairie whispers. The melody wraps around the room like a soft shawl, easing tension, inviting weary bodies to rest, even if only for a moment. Belle crosses to a quiet corner where a group of women sit, together, not just workers of the saloon, but also friends, and sometimes the only family many of them have. Their laughter is low, a tender shield against the harshness beyond these walls. Belle joins them briefly, exchanging a warm smile and a touch on an arm, grounding herself in their shared strength. In these moments, the saloon's rough edges soften. The wood creaks less like a warning and more like a lullaby. Outside, the wind hums through the streets, carrying the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. The sun has long set, and stars now peek shyly through a velvet sky. Belle's mind drifts to the ledger again, the small note folded beneath a glass. The warning it carried, beware the storm coming from the north, lingers in her thoughts like a shadow at the edge of firelight. She knows well the meaning of storms here, not just the weather, but the upheavals brought by new settlers, lawmen, or rival factions. The fragile peace she guards could shatter like glass at any moment. Her role is not simply to manage the saloon, but to hold this delicate balance. She is a mediator, a negotiator, sometimes a peacemaker, all without drawing a weapon or raising her voice louder than the soft hum of conversation. Her power lies in her calm presence, her keen mind, and an unyielding will shaped by years of survival. As the night deepens, a stranger enters. His boots tap softly on the wooden floorboards, his coat dusted with the desert's pale grit. Belle notices the quick glance he casts around the room, measuring and calculating. She steps closer, offering a glass and a nod, a silent invitation to rest. The stranger's eyes hold stories too, shadows of places far from this dusty town. They share few words, but their conversation flows like a gentle stream, careful, deliberate, full of unspoken understanding. Belle senses that he carries news, or perhaps a secret, the kind that could tip the scales of their fragile existence. Elsewhere, a poker game hums to life at the back tables. Men and women alike gather, their laughter tinged with rivalry and camaraderie. Cards slide across the felt, coins clink, and tension tightens and relaxes like a slow breath. Belle watches, not to judge, but to ensure the game stays fair. The tempers cool. The women who work here are more than entertainers. They are survivors. Their skills extend beyond song and dance. They read moods, diffuse conflicts, and manage debts. Belle admires their resilience, knowing that the line between safety and peril is often as thin as a whispered word. A young girl peeks nervously from behind the curtain. A newcomer, perhaps seeking refuge or a new start. Belle beckons gently, her voice soft like a lullaby, offering a seat and a warm smile. The girl relaxes, and for a moment, the weight of the world seems to lift, replaced by the fragile hope that this saloon, with all its rough edges, might be a place to belong. Outside, the night deepens further, and the wind carries a chill that seeps through cracks in the walls. Belle moves to close windows and check lanterns, her movements calm and steady. A quiet ritual that marks the passing hours. Her thoughts return again to the note and the storm. She knows she must prepare, quietly, wisely, without alarming those who depend on her. Survival here is a careful dance, balancing openness with caution, strength with gentleness. As the piano's final notes fade, Belle looks around the room, at the faces lit softly by lantern glow, at the worn wooden beams overhead, at the faint trail of smoke curling upward from a candle. She breathes deeply, feeling the pulse of this place, the heartbeat of a community held together by small acts of courage and care. Tonight, as you listen and rest, imagine the slow dance of shadows and light, the whispered stories exchanged over chipped glasses, the steady presence of a woman who holds a world together with patience and quiet strength. Let your breath fall into rhythm with hers, steady and calm. Let the soft murmur of the saloon lull you deeper into the night's embrace. The saloon's shadows lengthen as the night matures, folding the worn wooden walls in velvet darkness. The glow of lanterns flickers softly, casting gentle pools of golden light onto the creaking floorboards. Outside, the wind carries whispers. Through the narrow streets, a low and steady breath that stirs dust and memory alike. Clara Belle stands behind the bar, her hands moving with practiced ease as she polishes glasses and adjusts bottles. Each movement is deliberate, a quiet meditation, the slow turning of a key in a lock, the careful setting of a cornerstone. The rhythm soothes like the steady drip of water in a desert well. Tonight, the saloon is more than a gathering place. It is a sanctuary, a refuge from the unforgiving world beyond the doors, a place where stories are exchanged, wounds eased, and moments of grace are carved from hardship. Belle's eyes scan the room, taking in the faces softened by lamplight. There is old Jack, the miner, whose hands tremble but whose smile remains steady. Young Sarah, who waits tables with a nervous laugh and eyes full of dreams. And Tom, the traveling trader, whose quiet presence is a balm to the restless. The air hums with low conversations, the soft scrape of chairs, the gentle clinking of coins. Belle listens to the murmur, a delicate web of sound woven from hope, memory, and survival. Suddenly the door swings open with a sharp creak and a cold gust sweeps in. Belle turns, her gaze steady, as a figure steps into the light. A man, tall and lean, dust still clinging to his boots and coat. His eyes, dark and unreadable, sweep the room before settling on Belle. There is a tension in the air, subtle and electric, like the stillness before a desert storm. Belle meets his gaze calmly, her voice steady as she offers a nod of welcome. He approaches the bar, speaking softly, his words laced with caution and urgency. "There is news from the north," he says, "rumors of conflict, shifting alliances, and the tightening grip of lawmen eager to impose order." Belle listens, absorbing each detail like a map unfolding. The storm she had felt approaching was no mere weather. It was the restless churn of a changing frontier, threatening the fragile. Peace she had fought to build. She thanks the stranger with a quiet grace, sensing the weight of his arrival. The patrons glance up, curiosity flickering in their eyes. But Belle raises a hand, a silent command for calm. The night stretches on, the piano's melody shifting to a slow, haunting tune. Belle moves through the room, her presence a steady current beneath the swirling tides of uncertainty. She checks on her women, offering reassurance with a touch or a whispered word. They are warriors in their own right, resilient and resourceful, bound together by shared struggle and quiet determination in a corner. A group of men discuss the news in hushed tones, their faces shadowed but eyes sharp. Belle approaches, her voice soft but firm, reminding them of the saloon's purpose, a haven, not a battleground. Her words ripple through the room, weaving a fragile web of trust and understanding. The patrons settle back into their places, the tension easing like a tide receding. Belle returns behind the bar, pouring a glass of whiskey and raising it briefly to the room, a silent toast to survival, to resilience, to the unyielding spirit of those who call this place home. Outside, the wind carries the first hints of dawn, softening the edges of night. The saloon's lights flicker and fade, the world poised on the cusp of a new day. Belle stands at the threshold, feeling the weight of history in her bones and the quiet promise of tomorrow in her heart. As you rest now, friend, imagine the slow turning of the earth beneath endless skies, the whispered strength of a woman who holds a world together with patience and grace. Let your breath fall into the gentle rhythm of the night, soft and steady as the flicker of a lantern in the dark. Sleep peacefully under the wide, watchful stars.